This exhibition that I'll be talking about this evening, Encounters with the Collection Celebrating Art by Women, is the second in a series of permanent collection gallery rotations that are really meant to bring fresh perspectives to the interpretation of the Benton's holdings. And these are often in collaboration with campus partners. So this installation was mounted in support of two 50th anniversaries at UConn, that of the Women's Center and the Puerto Rican Latin American Cultural Center. The first of these new reinstallations occurred last year, and that was Encounters with the Collection Wood. So we were exploring wood as a material in art making. So on the screen, we can see just a couple of installation views of the exhibition. And this was a show that started with a research project that was undertaken to learn more about artists in the Benton's collections, because we didn't have really a comprehensive list of women identified artists, or really, any comprehensive list of how artists in the collection identify. So I undertook this project with the support of interns and Benton staff. And what we learned was that though many of the museum's most celebrated early acquisitions were by women artists, including Mary Cassatt, Angelica Kaufman, whose two really wonderful paintings we see here, Gabriela Munter, Ellen Emmett Rand, Kata Kollwitz, all of these big names, and here a work purchased in 1974. So within the first decade of the museum's existence, despite all of that collecting, less than 20% of named artists in the Benton's collections identify as women or as non-binary. So this statistic was actually not as sort of bad as I feared. I actually felt that a little less than 20% was not so terrible. But that kind of response, this statistic really underscores the weight of systemic gender discrimination. This fact that you can't do away with all of the centuries really where women did not have the same access to education, to exhibition opportunities as men, and therefore there just aren't as many women artists in the sort of historical record really to be collected. But at the same time, the museum can certainly do more in support of gender equity. And this exhibition, when I was putting it together, I decided that I would, touch on the challenges that women artists have faced, in addition to their achievements, really as a reminder of the work that is still to be done. So this exhibition starts with an engraving by Anna Maria van Sherman, a Dutch artist, scholar, and feminist whose self-portrait served as the frontispiece for an edition of her writings. Van Sherman's story is really fascinating. And as a woman in the 17th century, she was remarkable. She was a daughter of wealthy parents and a child prodigy. So she was educated by her father alongside her older brothers, and with many women artists, certainly before the 20th century, we really see a notable pattern. Many of these women had a father who was very supportive of them, who really wanted to educate them. And that's something that we see quite a bit, certainly with Angelica Kauffman. That was the case as well. But then on top of that, of course, you can't just have an encouraging parent. You yourself need to, have high sort of goals. So it was Van Sherman's, really determination, and also her brilliance that led her to being permitted to audit seminars at the University of Utrecht. And at this time, that was really unheard of in the case of a woman, though she was required to sit behind a partition for fear that she would distract the other male students merely by her presence. And, it really seems fitting that this print, the earliest work of art by a woman artist in the Bentons collection, is a self-portrait. It's a genre that has long provided artists with an opportunity to show off their skills, to reflect on their place in the world, and for women who have been historically excluded from life drawing sessions, this opportunity to really hone their skills, generally from the nude, which is, one of the reasons that they're excluded. If you can't draw somebody else, at least you can draw yourself. So, your own image would serve as a reliable subject. We can also think about a self-portrait like this one, given the sort of relative invisibility of women in the history of art, we can even consider self-portraits to be acts of defiance. So as if to say, I made this, I'm worthy of your attention. So another artist who's chosen to show herself in her work, and here actually at work, is Phyllis Agni, who completed this self-portrait the year after she began teaching art and art history courses at UConn's Waterbury campus, where she worked from 1973 until her retirement in 1992. And so this painting as Mirror, a painting of the artist in her studio, the trope of the painting as a mirror of nature that's referenced in the title goes back to Renaissance Italy, to Filippo Brunelleschi's experiments with perspective. And Agni herself painted in a realist style throughout her career. She often incorporated different forms of representation within the same painting. And so here we see scattered across her work table sculptural busts, an image reproduced in a book, a printed textile, through the open door, which is another framing device. We see a painting hanging on the wall. To my eye, it looks like a copy of a Vermeer. And, Agni herself was honored with a retrospective exhibition at the Benton in 1996. And I love this painting so much. So I put it on the title wall. So throughout history, a lot of the time when women make it into the museum, it's not so much because they are the artist, but because they are the subject of the painting. And the Guerrilla Girls sort of draw our attention to that in this poster from 1989. Do women have to be naked to get into the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York? The Guerrilla Girls are a collective with more than 60 members, and they're dedicated to using art to create change. So they're self-described as the conscience of the art world, and their posters expose gender and ethnic bias and support human rights. And similar to what we see here, they most often do this through a straightforward reporting of statistics. And their members remain anonymous. They wear gorilla masks, as you see in the poster, and they use pseudonyms that celebrate dead women artists. And so their work really calls out very boldly art dealers, artists, collectors, and museums by name. The group formed in 1985 in the wake of a protest at the Museum of Modern Art, and that protest was aimed at the lack of representation of women and also artists of color. And in recent years, they've revisited some of their most famous posters, including this one with updated statistics. So in 1989, they found that less than 5% of the artists in the modern art galleries at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art were women, while 85% of the nudes were female. By 2005, it was 3% and 83%. By 2012, 4% and 76%. So, a lack of real change that just shows that their work is far from over. Another artist who's meditating on this idea of the muse and the muse versus the artist is Carrie Mae Weems. And here she uses her own image. So that is her in the photograph that we see to comment on the exclusion or objectification of Black women's bodies in modern art. And the title here, Not Manet's Type, comments specifically and references this painting, Olympia, by Edouard Manet, a name that is likely familiar from surveys of modern art. This is his iconic painting from 1863, and it shows a nude white woman, a prostitute, being brought flowers by a Black woman, her servant. And the painting was an avant-garde attack on academic tradition, and that attack is accomplished through the objectification of the female form. And so what Carrie Mae Weems does is she subverts this formula. She presents herself as both artist and model and asserts her desirability as a Black woman. Weems began taking pictures after receiving a camera for her 20th birthday, and she studied photography at the California Institute of Arts and the University of California, San Diego. And it was in 2014 that she was the first African-American woman to have a solo exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And when I had the Women's Center come through the exhibition, that was really a fact that stood out to a lot of people, just how shocking it is that it's just less than a decade that milestone had been reached. So in the exhibition, another role that is explored, in addition to the muse, is also motherhood. And on the screen is a photograph by Imogen Cunningham. One of her botanic studies recognized as her most significant contribution to photography. So in works like this one, she isolated and abstracted the plant's forms so we can really enjoy its structure and also its beauty. I mean, this magnolia blossom is spectacular. She began the series in the 1920s, and during this time, she was balancing the roles of artist, of housewife, and also of mother to 3 young boys. And so she later recalled, quote, "The reason I really turned to plants was because I couldn't get out of my own backyard when my children were small. I photographed the plants in my garden and steered my children around at the same time," end quote. So this idea that, she starts this series, one of the most significant of her career, in part out of necessity, because she really has to be just photographing what's around her, because she needs to be home with her children. Her inclusion in the seminal Film und Foto exhibition in Stuttgart, Germany in 1929 firmly established her reputation as a leading modernist photographer. And in 1932, she helped to found the group F64, which was an association of San Francisco Bay Area photographers that included Ansel Adams, John Paul Edwards, Edward Weston, and others. So she's very successful. But despite that, she faced decades of financial difficulties, especially after her divorce from artist Roy Partridge in 1934. She's home with their children, trying to carry on a really brilliant photography career. Roy Partridge basically said there's room for one artist in this family, and that was him. So he was off on sketching trips while she's at home. And so, following her divorce, she sought emotional support from a group, San Francisco Women Artists, and herself served as a resource for women artists, including Dorothea Lange and Ruth Asawa. There's many associations for women, especially in the late 19th and early 20th century, for women artists to really band together and to support each other. The exhibition includes many women who defied expectations during their their lives, and also really test our expectations and our stereotypes of women artists to this day. On the screen, a poster by Jessie Wilcox Smith and the Benton's wonderful pastel by Mary Cassatt, both showing children, and women and children were considered to be the most appropriate subject for women to paint, for women to depict. Mary Cassatt was born in Pennsylvania. Her ambitions for success as an artist first led her in 1865 to study in Paris, which was then the center of the art world. A decade later, she settled there. She was frustrated by the conservatism of the French Salon, which was the most prestigious place that one could exhibit in Paris at the time. And so she accepted the invitation of her friend, Edgar Degas, to show with the Impressionists in 1877, and she participated in half of the group's 8 exhibitions. And so Cassatt shared their interest in painting scenes of everyday life, but as an upper middle class woman artist in the late 19th century, she could not participate. She was barred from many of the places that are made so famous by artists, including Degas, cafe concerts, other urban entertainments that are pictured by male impressionists. And so Cassatt was largely confined to portraying the domestic sphere, and she became known for her sensitive depictions of motherhood. So drawings of motherhood like this one are sometimes viewed as expressions of a kind of universal feminine experience, but scholars argue that it was actually Cassatt's ambitions as an artist that determined her adoption of this theme. So the subject appealed to conservative feminists who were an affluent segment of the market at the time. They welcomed images that acknowledged a woman's natural place in the home. For Cassatt herself, her own ambivalence is perhaps signaled by the fact that her 2 models here were unrelated. The baby, Hélène, was the daughter of the innkeeper in Septoy, in this French town where Cassatt made the drawing in the summer of 1890. And the woman is actually Cassatt's own companion housekeeper. Mary Cassatt herself never married. She didn't have children. She chose instead to pursue her career. And for her, that was really the choice, to have to do one or the other. Also on the screen, the poster by Jessie Wilcox Smith was created to support the war effort during World War I. And this coincided with the golden age of illustration, which ended in 1925. It started in 1885. And so during this time period, developments in printing technology and also paper production essentially made it more affordable to produce books and other print media, and also to reproduce color images. And the Benton has a really wonderful collection of World War I posters that give us a great window on illustration during this time. And women illustrators were hired in great numbers to represent the perspectives of a growing number of female readers and also consumers. So Smith studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which was the earliest institution to admit female students, at least in the United States. She studied with illustrator Howard Pyle at the Drexel Institute of Art, Science, and Industry, which is now Drexel University. And she was one of the highest paid illustrators of her time. And she's best known for images like this one, poetic, idealized images of domestic life. Her own life, however, did not resemble her illustrations. At PAFA in Philadelphia, she met Elizabeth Shippen Green and Violet Oakley, who became close friends and collaborators. This trio of successful female illustrators known as the Red Rose Girls lived together in a house from 1897 to 1911, along with another woman, Henrietta Cousins. The group drifted apart, but Smith and Cousins resided together until their deaths. And today it's rather unclear if they were close friends, romantic partners, or perhaps both. So this idea really that either one of these artists, so well known for these images of children and women and children, that this is a reflection of their own kind of everyday life, is really just not true. They were actually making the kind of work that within the limitations of their time period would get them the highest acclaim and, certainly the best living, the best money as well. So stereotypes of subject matter appropriate for women includes images like we're just looking at of women and children, also paintings of flowers. And on the screen, we're looking at one of Jane Peterson's wonderful flower portraits, which became a specialty of hers. As a young artist, she was an avid traveler. She's keen to experience Europe in the same way as her male counterparts. And, she's known for lively European street scenes. But her love of flower paintings really came to dominate her artistic output in the later years of her career. So she frequently created still lifes from the flowers that she found in her own gardens, first in Massachusetts. She also traveled often to Palm Beach, Florida, which she called the garden spot of the world. And so in 1925, she started focusing on flower paintings. And by 1945, she actually published an instructional guide on the subject. And so for Peterson, she wrote that flowers were, quote, living things with personality and refinement, with delicacy of form and structure, with variety of size and shape, with rhythm and charm of arrangement, with grace and dignity and bearing. And though she resumed her travels to Europe after her first husband passed away, flower painting, continued to be one of her passions. And this painting is really never before exhibited. It had been in storage for 30 years, and we had it conserved for the exhibition. So, a wonderful example of Jane Peterson's work. So the exhibition is one that is filled with trailblazers. We've already talked about a number of artists who were the first to do different things, like Carrie Mae Weems, the first African-American woman to have a solo show at the Guggenheim in 2014. Isabel Case Borgata was one of the first women to study sculpture at Yale University. She created this sculpture following her graduation from Yale, where she earned a BFA in 1944. And she's an artist whose work met with early acclaim. She exhibited at the Whitney Museum of American Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art before age 30. And during the mid-20th century, it was really frequent for artists to not to really gain much recognition until a bit later in their lives than we're used to today. So that's quite an achievement. She received the D'Orsay Prize from the National Association of Women Artists in 1952. And then following her marriage to painter Robert Borgata, Isabel found herself balancing the roles of working artist, wife, and soon enough mother. And she recalled, quote, "For many years, I promoted my husband and just kept quiet about what I was doing. I think some of our friends and neighbors didn't even know I was a sculptor," end quote. And so to help promote opportunities for women artists, to help address the gender imbalance that she found in the art world, Borgata helped found the advocacy group Women in the Arts, which is still around today. And this sculpture, a relatively recent addition to the Bentons collection, is an example of Borgata's work in wood. She did also carve stone and preferred to carve stone, but turned to wood, especially during the years that she raised her 3 daughters, who donated this sculpture to the museum. So this wonderful mother and child. So Borgata's involvement in advocating for women is certainly part of a sort of feminist wave that's happening in the art world, kind of following the World War II in the 1960s. And in the exhibition, we have many works that are more overtly feminist. And an example is this work by Liz Quisgard. Quisgard has said of her work, "My goal is to surprise and engage the mind by seducing the eye. Toward that end, I rely on pattern. We all understand a row of triangles, a strip of squares, an arrangement of circles and swirls. No need to ask their meaning. They simply are what they are. They speak to us universally and without apology." And so Quisgard has found inspiration all over the world and throughout history. And she's created her art using found objects, but also using fiber and yarn. And this is an example of her work in yarn. And so for this artist, she revels in her work's decorative qualities, that abstraction, that idea that this is a work that, simply seduces the eye, this arrangement of circles and swirls. Decorative being a term that's often used pejoratively to describe and also feminize fine art. Two more artists whose work is really shaped by feminism, Nancy Spero and Maureen McCabe. Nancy Spero was born in Cleveland. She attended the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she met the artist Leon Golub. The couple married after Spero pursued additional training in Paris. They raised their 3 sons largely in Europe and then returned to New York in 1964. And this is really when their work took an activist turn. Spero was one of many artists who's responding to the civil rights movement and also to the Vietnam War. And she's an early feminist. She's a member of groups including the Art Workers Coalition, which protested the lack of representation of women and artists of color in New York City's museums, pressured them to become more equitable by offering a free admission day, something that we still enjoy today. She's also a founding member of the Artists in Residence, AIR Gallery, the first women's cooperative gallery where she exhibited her signature scroll paintings. And in 1974, she decided to make women the sole focus of her work. And she chose to work on paper rather than on canvas as a rebellion against art world conventions. That idea that history painting, and painting in general would be at the top of a sort of hierarchy. She repurposed found imagery, and she makes very small works of art. This piece is maybe postcard size. And yet her work, despite its size, has a really kind of urgent message. Another work on paper, another refusal of monumentality, is Maureen McCabe's collage. This is a contemporary take on the myth of Andromeda and Perseus. But here we have an important change, an important modification. Andromeda is chained to a rock. She's awaiting her death by a sea monster, and she's saved not by the hero Perseus, but by the female artist who clips her chain with a pair of scissors. And McCabe is a celebrated collage artist who combines found objects with drawn and printed images. She creates poetic and dreamlike works. She studied at RISD and the Cranbrook Academy of Art, and in 2011 retired from Connecticut College, where she taught for 4 decades. So another artist who's really associated with feminism is Ana Mendieta. she created her Silueta series, her best known body of work between 1973 and 1980 in various locations, including Iowa and Mexico. And so this work is a fusion of performance and land art. In the series, she would impress her body or just a simple outline of her figure into the landscape and then document that in photography and also in film. And so this dialogue with the land is really rooted in her own experience of displacement. She's born in Havana. She's sent to Iowa at age 12 with her sister as part of an asylum program for children in the wake of the Cuban Revolution. And so they spent years in an orphanage before being reunited with their family. Mendieta was unable to return to Cuba until the 1980s. And so this trace of her body, whether obscured or totally absent, is a kind of metaphor for her exile from home. After she completed an MFA in the University of Iowa's intermedia program in 1978, she moved to New York. She joined the AIR gallery that Nancy Sparrow was also a part of. Her promising career was tragically cut short soon after her marriage to sculptor Carl Andre in 1985, when she fell from the couple's 34th floor apartment. And Andre was tried and acquitted for her murder, a verdict that remains controversial to this day. So the women's movement makes opportunities through things like collective galleries for women. It also prompts renewed attention to earlier artists. And so this is true of Imogen Cunningham and the photographer whose botanical study we looked at, and also Alice Neal, whose lithograph we see here. She really didn't gain widespread recognition for her frank portraits of friends and acquaintances until the 1970s. And it's the women's movement's interest in personal subject matter that aligns with Neal's work that sort of causes her to gain recognition. She was born to a middle-class family in Pennsylvania. She graduated from the Philadelphia School of Design for Women, now the Moore College of Art and Design, in 1925, and had a difficult personal life, often living in poverty. But she continued to paint through it all. And she found inspiration from her neighbors in Spanish Harlem, where she lived from 1938 to 1962. Another thing that impacts her sort of rediscovery is the questioning of the heroic masculinity of post-war art. Abstract expressionism, Jackson Pollock, this kind of macho art that had led advanced art in the United States, in the 40s and early 1950s. By the 60s, people are sort of questioning that. Neal's work really starts to draw more attention. And by 1974, the Whitney presented her first retrospective exhibition. So at the age of 74, she sort of receives, this kind of crowning achievement. And she made this print 1 year before her death, when her reputation during her lifetime was really at its height. So this exhibition also brings a global perspective on feminism and women's rights through the Benton's collection. On the screen, a photograph by Lala Essaydi, and a very large photograph, an image that is nearly life-size. Essaydi is an artist who uses photography to examine her childhood in Morocco. She lives in the United States, and she reflects on the Converging Territories, which is the title of this series, of her experience as a North African-born artist and woman living in the United States, so that intersection of identities. She made this photograph the year she graduated with an MFA from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts and Tufts University in Massachusetts. So in Islamic tradition, the public sphere is the domain of men traditionally, while women are expected to remain indoors. And so when Essaydi was a child, she and other women who disobeyed these rules were sent to a vacant house that was owned by her family, for as long as a month. And this was a practice that was abandoned only a few decades before this series was made. So to make this photograph, the artist returned to this house, and she covered every surface in Islamic calligraphy. And this was a sacred art form once closed to women. And she is very deliberate also about the materials that she's using. So she used henna, a material associated with women's work. And so the series sort of gives us this architectural space that at one point was a space of confinement, a space of punishment, a space of silence. And the photographs that Essaydi makes allow her and the women that she captures in them to speak. And so she says, "My photographs are about the women subjects' participation in contributing to the greater emancipation of Arab women, while at the same time conveying to an outside audience a very rich tradition of practice, relationships, and ideas that are so often misunderstood and misrepresented in the West." So I have just a couple more works that I'll share before we'll have some time for questions. On the screen, another photograph by an artist who's exploring different aspects of identity, including gender and also sexuality. This is a photograph that's part of a series that the artist Collier Shore made, photographing high school and collegiate wrestlers in action. And this is another large image, a life-size image. And you'll notice the dramatic lighting and also the wrestler's pose quite intentionally have visual parallels in medieval depictions of martyrdom and the dramatic paintings of the Italian Baroque. So we think of an artist like Caravaggio. The title here, 160 pounds, references the wrestler's weight. And also the ascetic lifestyle. I mean, the sort of self denial that's demanded by the sport. And the artist really connects that with monasteries and other religious communities. And so, this whole series of photographs of handsome young men are tinged with eroticism. But for the artist, her own desire is more closely aligned with identification rather than objectification. So kind of taking us back, in a way to some of the objectifying that we're talking about at the very beginning of the talk. And she has explained, I'm interested in the life I would have had if I were a boy. And this is one facet of it. So Shore, who's gay, explores gender expression and sexuality in her work. She grew up in Queens and studied journalism at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And, she works across commercial and editorial photography and is really known for her portraits of adolescents like this one. And many of them incorporate elements of fantasy. So on the screen, the last work that I'll talk about is also the most recent acquisition that's featured in the exhibition. And this is Valerie Hegarty's Fawcett with Horsehead from her COVID Diaries series, which she completed in 2021. Hegarty is known for exploring themes of American history, and particularly the legacy of 19th century American art in her paintings, sculptures, ceramics, and also installation art. So she starts out with a personal inspiration and seeks, poetic connections between her personal history, art history, and current events. So the COVID Diaries series that this work is part of is a suite of sculptures that were inspired by the artist's personal journal entries from the onset of the COVID pandemic. So during the time period, especially during lockdown, when Valerie couldn't get to her studio, she made sure that she spent a lot of time writing, and then actually made a whole body of work rooted in those journal entries. So in this series, she depicts the domestic environment under assault by outside forces, a deadly, uncontrolled virus, political turmoil and social unrest, a worsening opioid epidemic, climate-related catastrophes, and violent manifestations of racism. And, all of this was happening during the pandemic. And so this sculpture, which I've so enjoyed having in the gallery and using as an object for workshops with students, really illustrates in a very clever way external calamities, sort of intruding directly into the home. So that juxtaposition of the faucet, the daily chores, the washing of hands, the washing of dishes, here collide with the horse head, with catastrophic world news. So the artist has said, in this piece, I was thinking about what traces are left after monuments are physically removed, and how the ideology of white supremacy infiltrates the home, including through everyday complicity, end quote. And so Hegarty actually modeled the horse head on the bronze equestrian statue of Robert E. Lee, which was ordered removed in 2020 from Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, following the murder of George Floyd. And so here, these ideas of the news, kind of just rushing in with the water from the faucet, but also, kind of doubling into thinking about that contamination of racism and white supremacy. Hegarty is a white artist, and this is something that she's thinking about for herself as well. This thing that is just so part of American society. It's almost like it's sort of polluted our society in the same way that water might be polluted. So how do you kind of reckon with that? Just a fantastic work, and one that you can hear more about next month on March 23rd, when Valerie will be at the Benton delivering our annual Middleman Lecture in the Arts. So if you're interested in hearing more about the COVID Diaries series and hearing from the artist, definitely mark your calendar for that. So I've shared about 1/3 of the artists in this exhibition. I really hope that those of you who join me this evening have an opportunity to see the exhibition, to explore and see the other 2/3 of it. So I hope we've piqued your interest. And the exhibition will be up through the summer, and we'll actually refresh it, so trade out works on paper and have it up for another year. So it will be ongoing through 2024.